Have you ever met a teacher that expresses their emotion through their body language more so than their words? Sometimes you don't really know what they mean by their movements or especially their facial expressions, but there's always a method to their madness. For this speech, I observed my psychology teacher, who is a very animated and expressive teacher, especially while he's teaching his lessons, and he exhibits many nonverbals within his class that are definitely worth taking note of. Hi, I am Jada, and today I will discuss with you the setting in which I observed my psychology teacher in, my personal analysis of his nonverbal communications, and an explanation of his nonverbals. So to begin, the setting has a very large impact on the way a person communicates, especially through their nonverbal communication. In my class, there's roughly 30 students, give or take a few, which makes it difficult immediately for him to effectively communicate with all of us because he's one person and there's 30 of us. He's been a teacher at the school for roughly 9 years, so at this point he's pretty comfortable with the material in his classroom, which gives him a little bit of a head start on things. I have the class 4th hour, and in our class it is juniors and seniors, so we have lunch after advisory, which is a 20-minute class period we have in between. So at this point we're all just ready to go to lunch. He's ready to go to lunch, and we're all very talkative, but he's still obviously a teacher and he has to get his lessons done. He's pretty laid back usually, but whenever he wants to start class, he wants to start class and he'll let you know. I would say that the setting and circumstances clearly have an impact on the way that he communicates with us differently than his other classes. I never really realized how often he uses body language to communicate with us until this observation, and I found myself observing him more and more every single day that I went to his class, which isn't as creepy as it sounds, I promise. One of the first things he does after shutting the door, indicating that he's ready to start class, is make a zip motion across his mouth to signal to the class that they need to stop talking and he's ready to start his notes. When we finally get around to starting notes, when people decide to stop talking, he typically will ask us questions, and believe it or not, with 30 students in there, it's like pulling teeth to get someone to answer. This usually frustrates him, as it would just about any teacher, and so he'll move his hand across his notes that are sitting on this podium, indicating that the answer is probably right in front of our faces and we just need to stop talking and pay attention and be more participating in our class. A lot of times he'll even give us verbal cues and hints to try to get us to answer, but primarily he expresses his emotion, his frustration and anger through the motion on the paper. Another thing I noticed was his eyes dart around a lot whenever he's going over his notes. He wants to make sure that everyone's paying attention, they're not sleeping, their head isn't on their desk, that everyone's attentive and actually paying attention to the material that he's teaching at the time. And I noticed whenever he does this, he also avoids eye contact with everyone, which could indicate that he's uncomfortable with the information or the class, or a lot of times if it's a controversial topic, he'll look at the back of the class, like behind the last row of seats, just so that way he's not making uncomfortable eye contact with the student during a controversial or unnormal topic to be talking with high schoolers about. In many cases, he'll nod his head in agreement with the things he's saying. A lot of times you'll see a person say something and then their facial expressions or body language will say opposite of what they just said. But most of the time, in his case, he actually agrees with what he's saying, indicating that he is trying to give us correct and accurate information, indicating that he's also a very good teacher, in my opinion. When a student answers one of his questions, and it isn't quite the answer he was looking for, he'll raise his eyebrows, kind of in shock or concern, especially if it's an easy question that they should have gotten right. Say we just went over it in notes that day or the previous day, and they should know how to answer, but instead they want to be the class clown and give a funny answer, which is clearly not what he's wanting at this point because he's already irritated and frustrated with the talkative class. He'll often put his hand on his head, or he'll give you the head shake of disappointment and look down at the ground because he's indicating with that he's disappointed in either their lack of motivation to answer their question properly or their inability to pay attention while he's going over notes, giving them plenty of room to make really inappropriate answers. He'll often use his hands to motion to an image on the big Promethean board behind him where our notes are at, so that he can emphasize the importance of, say, a picture or a chart of information that's very important for us to know for our test or for a worksheet that we have to do. A lot of times he does this out of concern for the class. That way he makes sure that we're engaged in the lesson and that we're actually going to pay attention and remember this information because it's crucial to our test. When he's trying to tell us the definition, a lot of times you can see him like looking off into space, or like he'll look down at the ground, and he always kind of like furrows his brows in a little bit, and so you can tell he's in really deep thought. And this is because he's either confused by the definition himself, that's something he's not super familiar with, or he's trying to make sense of it and give us the best definition he can based on our class. That way we can succeed on the test and really understand the information. This could be out of concern for the class or just simply confusion of the definition himself. Along with furrowing his brows, often when he's frustrated, he'll grab the bridge of his nose, which could act as a soothing mechanism or way of holding back his frustration. So he'll physically put his hand on the bridge of his nose like this, and that could either create a barrier between him and other students that he's just wanting to distance himself from, that way he doesn't kind of lose it with them. Or it could just be, like I said, a soothing mechanism to kind of like help him take a breather and calm down if the situation is frustrating or irritating to him. Since he's a very laid-back and easygoing teacher, he expresses his emotions, especially his anger, through his nonverbals rather than verbally to the entire class. It wouldn't look good on a teacher if they just yelled at 30 students at the same time. So he tries to keep his composure, and a lot of times he'll conceal how he's actually feeling, which could be a sign of isolation or more or less maintaining his composure with his students, because he's very laid back and easygoing, like I said, but he's also very professional and takes his job very seriously, which makes him a very good teacher. Overall in class, he appeared to seem very easygoing, but also frustrated with the situation and the class. His nonverbals demonstrated an array of emotions, but primarily seemed to be frustration, concern, and a little bit of anger. But the concern mostly because he's a very conscientious teacher. He utilizes his nonverbals as a pertinent piece of his communication with his students. To conclude, the setting and circumstances can definitely affect the way that he utilizes his nonverbals, which can mean a variety of things depending on the situation. He's typically concealing his emotions from the class to prevent from yelling at them and losing his composure in his classroom. So next time you're sitting in an animated teacher's lecture, know that their hand gestures and facial expressions could mean more than what you see on the surface. A deeper meaning could be lying behind each movement and expression. Thank you.